John Ledyard was a man who was born with two great gifts, one the most precious in the world, the other the most perilous. The first was an abounding physical vitality, which made the casual business of being alive a divine adventure. The second, an imagination of the sort which refuses discipline and runs away with the whole mind. The adventure begins in the spring of the year 1772 with the farmers of the Connecticut Valley halting their plows in the furrow and straightening up to stare at a certain extraordinary vehicle going north on the river road. This vehicle was nothing less than a two-wheeled sulky, then a rig almost unheard of outside the towns and one never known to be used by travelers. A sulky with bundle baggage lashed behind, surely the driver must be an odd kind of rogue. Stopping at nightfall at a farm, the stranger met with close scrutiny by rural candlelight. He was a fair-haired youth, an inch or so under 6 feet tall and of a rangy and powerful build. His name, he said, was John Ledyard, and he was on his way to become a missionary to the Indians. This youth, John Ledyard, had seen the light of day in the village of Groton, Connecticut. His father, a sea captain, had died young. Legal mischance or a descent of harpy relatives had deprived the young mother of her property. And John had been brought up in the house of his grandfather at Hartford. Then had come years at grammar school, the death of his grandfather, his virtual adoption by an uncle and aunt, and the attempt of these good folk to make a lawyer of him, which experiment had not been a success. At 21 years of age, John presented something of a problem to his kinsman. What was to be done with this great fair-haired youth who had neither money nor influential friends? Suddenly, destiny came down the Connecticut Valley with a letter. The Reverend Eleazar Wheelock, founder of Dartmouth, wrote to John inviting him to the college. The passion of this good man's life was the evangelization of the dispossessed and incorrigible Indians. He visited them in their forlorn and dwindling encampments. He took their young men to be his pupils, and he had founded his college largely for the sake of training the sons of colonists to be Indian missionaries. Dr. Wheelock had been a friend of Grandfather Ledyard's, and something or other had recalled to his mind the fair-haired boy who he had seen playing about the old man's house at Hartford. He would make a missionary of the lad and send him forth to comfort the copper-skinned of the elect. A letter arrived offering John the status of a free pupil destined to the Indian field. Sulky and ancient nag were presently produced from somewhere, perhaps from John's own pocket, for he had just inherited a tiny legacy. The uncle and aunt waved farewell, a whip cracked in the air, and John and his sulky vanished over the hills and far away. At Dartmouth College, he liked to act in plays, he liked the out-of-doors, and on one occasion induced a group of comrades to climb with him to the top of a neighboring height and spend the night on evergreen boughs, strewn on the floor of deep holes dug in the snow. Letters of classmates paint Ledyard as restless, impatient of the dry bones of discipline, authoritative on occasion, and more a man with devoted cronies than one largely and carelessly popular. All other Dartmouth memories have faded in the epic glow of the adventurer's flight from his alma mater. He came to college in a sulky. He left it an even more adventurous way. In the spring of 1773, the sound of the axe rang in the Dartmouth woods. Presently came a shout, a great crackling crash, and the sound and tremor of a heavy blow upon the earth. John Ledyard and his cronies had just felled a giant pine standing close by the bank of the Connecticut River. From this log, the undergraduates fashion a dugout canoe, 50 feet long and 3 feet wide, a veritable barge of a canoe, and once the digging and hacking is done with, John himself weaves at the stern of the craft a kind of shelter bower of willow wands. Word passes among the lads to be at the river early in the morning. The undergraduates gathered at the huge dugout under the light of early day and watched their friend carry supplies to his canoe. John first put aboard a provender of dried venison and cornmeal, then a huge bearskin for a coverlet, and last of all 2 strangely assorted books, a Greek New Testament and the poems of Ovid. The Yankee sophomore stepped into his canoe. His friends all push together, and the craft slides off into the river, which is rushing past their little college and on into the world. John masters the swirl with his strength and woodsman skill, and the future vagabond disappears on the way to his fantastic destiny. Little does he know that in January and February 1787, a forlorn, penniless but indomitable traveler will accomplish one of the most amazing feats ever performed by mortal man, a 1,500-mile trudge through an unknown country deep in Arctic snow and cold, and that the vagabond will be John Ledyard. The mystery of his truancy remains to puzzle the world, for after all, why had he run away? In abandoning Dartmouth, he had locked behind him the one door to an education which had opened to him in his obscurity. John Ledyard's contemporaries said simply that the spring was racing in his blood and that the born vagabond had been unable to control a vagabond urge. There is a world of truth in the reply, but not quite all the truth. The present day, with greater historical perspective, will have it that this fair-haired lad was not really a scion of the seaboard generations of transplanted Englishmen, but a son of the new, native-born and native-minded culture, which was springing up in the hearts of Americans during the last half of the 18th century. His place is with the lords of the frontier, but at Dartmouth the 17th century sat in the seat of power, for intellectually, Wheelock was a contemporary of Cotton Mather. But young John was of different stuff, and moreover, he was in certain ways curiously modern. His flight from Dartmouth thus becomes a bit of vagabondage, hiding an instinctive recoil, for had he accepted a missionary career, the 17th century would have claimed him forever for its own. Down the Connecticut River floated the log canoe carrying a young New Englander from theology under Oliver Cromwell to adventure under George III. Now came difficulties and explanations, and John cut the knot by going to sea. Four years later, at the end of a voyage, a young American seaman walks the narrow streets of London. John Ledyard is now 25 years old. Life has done little with him, and he has done little with life. His friends at home are beginning to regard him as something of a ne'er-do-well, and the pockets of his sailor breeches are emptier than ever. John steps into a tavern and hears news which fires his imagination and sets his blood to racing. Captain James Cook, the great navigator and explorer, is about to make a third voyage to the South Seas, and ships are being prepared and loaded for the expedition. With characteristic audacity, John hurries directly to the captain at his lodgings in Chelsea Hospital and boldly requests to be allowed to go. His directness pleases, and John Ledyard walks back to London, no longer an obscure American seaman, but a corporal of His Majesty's Marines attached to Cook's own vessel, the Discovery. The two ships of the expedition, the Old Resolution and the New Discovery, sailed from England on July 12, 1776, bound for the South Pacific by the Cape of Good Hope. The Discovery was the more interesting of the ships. Captain Cook himself was aboard, a man over 6 feet in height, with brown eyes, a pleasant countenance, and brown hair tied behind. Ledyard often saw the tall figure in great cloak and three-cornered hat standing at the other end of the deck. Perhaps of even greater interest to the ship's company was the Noah's Ark farmyard aboard of cattle, sheep, goats, ducks, dogs, horses, cats, pigs, and rabbits, all intended as gifts to estimable natives they encounter. This animal world was strengthened by a vast contingent of cockroaches who fell in showers to the deck when the sails were unfurled before getting underway. After a pause by the barren rocks of the Antarctic, and after revisiting Tasmania and New Zealand, the expedition sounded its way through the archipelagos of the South Pacific and anchored in the Bay of Tongatabu in the Friendly Islands. The ships remained there 26 days gathering stores. From the Friendly Islands, the Discovery carried John to Hawaii and then to the coast, whose memory was to shape the greater adventures of his life. By the last half of the 18th century, the one accessible coast of North America, which lingered unvisited and unexplored, was the coast of the Pacific Northwest, or to be more definite, the shores of northern British Columbia and the Great Peninsula of Alaska. The geographers of the day were aware that Bering had sighted such a coast and that the Russians had crossed to it from northeastern Siberia and claimed it for their empire. But with these two facts, their knowledge came to an end. The character and the conformation of the land remained unknown. Cook was to be the first to make a scientific survey of the region, for the Admiralty had instructed him to explore any rivers or inlets that might lead eastward to Hudson's or Baffin's Bay through the Northwest Passage of Romance. The ships turned north in December 1778 and arrived off the coast of what is now the state of Oregon on March 7, 1778. The weather was cold and stormy, but summer came upon them as they worked their way to the north, the splendid summer of the cool, northwestern land. John Ledyard was once more on American soil, and what an America it was, this great unknown land of bold, indented coasts, evergreens and alders, snow-capped inland mountains, and great rivers moving unsullied to the sea. The beauty and living quality of the new country conquered the Connecticut explorer even as it conquered those who followed him. Carefully charting the way, Cook's expedition sailed along the coast to Alaska, past the towering cliffs of vast glaciers rising pale green from the darker surges washing at their base. Into this great fjord and into that went the ships, waking the deep Arctic silence with the plunge of their anchors and the hurrying rattle of chain. At the island of Unalaska, John offered to go with native guides in search of some white strangers, and thus had a unique opportunity to spy out the land.
I took with me some presents adapted to the taste of the Indians, brandy and bottles and bread, but no other provisions. I went entirely unarmed by the advice of Captain Cook. The country was rough and hilly and the weather wet and cold. At about 3 hours before dark, we came to a large bay and saw a canoe approaching us from the opposite side of the bay, in which were 2 Indians. It was beginning to be dark when the canoe came to us. It was a Skinner kayak, with 2 holes to accommodate 2 sitters. The Indians that came in the canoe talked a little with my 2 guides and desired I would get into the canoe. This I did not very readily agree to, however, as there was no other place for me but to be thrust into the space between the holes, extended at length upon my back, and wholly excluded from seeing the way I went, or the power of extricating myself on any emergency. But as there was no alternative, I submitted thus to be stowed away in bulk and went head foremost very swift through the water about an hour, when I felt the canoe strike a beach, and afterwards lifted up and carried some distance, and then sat down again, after which I was drawn up by the shoulders by 3 or 4 men, for it was now so dark that I could not tell who they were, though I was conscious that I heard a language that was new. I was conducted by 2 of these persons, who appeared to be strangers, about 40 rods, when I saw lights and a number of huts. As we approached one of them, a door opened, and discovered a lamp, by which to my joy and surprise I discovered that the 2 men who held me by each arm were Europeans, fair and comely, and concluded from their appearance that they were Russians, which I soon after found to be true. We had supper, which consisted of boiled whale, halibut fried in oil, and broiled salmon. I had a very comfortable bed, composed of different fur skins, both under and over me. After I had lain down, the Russians assembled the Indians in a very silent manner, and said prayers after the manner of the Greek church, which is much like the Roman.
The meeting of the New England Marine and certain Russian fur traders visiting Alaska to buy skins for the Chinese trade is not without significance to the philosophic reader of history, for it is the first contact of a white civilization advancing across America from the east with another and a belated white civilization approaching the continent from the west. Save for the tragic death of Captain Cook, who was attacked by natives at Hawaii, there is little in the further history of the ships to halt the chronicle of Corporal John. The ships revisited the Bering Sea and the Russian Asiatic coast, cruised to China and returned to England round the same Cape of Good Hope. The expedition had been at sea exactly 4 years and 3 months. For 2 troubled years, John Ledyard walks the flagstones of a British barrack yard, for the War of the Revolution is being fought in America, and he can neither escape nor bring himself to take naval service against his countrymen. Barrack life, however, ends by exhausting his patience. He seeks a transfer to the American station, and the December of 1782 finds him aboard a British man-of-war lying in Huntington Bay, Long Island. As the island was then in the hands of the British, John obtains 7 days' leave, but patriotically forgets to report aboard. From a stay with friends at Huntington, he hastens to Southold, where his mother keeps a boarding house, then frequented chiefly by British officers. He rode up to the door, went in, and asked if he could be accommodated in her house as a lodger. She replied that he could, and showed him a room into which his baggage was conveyed. After having adjusted his dress, he came out and took a seat by the fire in company with several other officers, without making himself known to his mother or entering into conversation with any person. She frequently passed and repassed through the room, and her eye was observed to be attracted to him with more than usual attention. At last, after looking at him steadily for some minutes, she deliberately put on her spectacles, approached nearer to him, begging his pardon for her rudeness, and telling him that he so much resembled a son of hers, who had been absent 8 years, that she could not resist her inclination to view him more closely. The scene that followed may be imagined, but not described. Traveling by night down the Long Island shore, John found a way to reach Hartford and took refuge there at the house of his uncle Seymour. He remained with him 4 months, writing an account of his voyage with Cook. The book was published and is now exceedingly rare.
I am now at Mr. Seymour's and as happy as need be. I have a little cash, 2 coats, 3 waistcoats, 6 pair stockings, and half a dozen ruffled shirts. I eat and drink when I am asked, and visit when invited. In short, I generally do as I'm bid. All I want of my friends is friendship. Possessed of that, I am happy.
The long and cruel struggle of the American Revolution was drawing to an end. Peace was at hand. John Ledyard, now 32 years of age, found himself a celebrity in his own country. He was John Ledyard, the American traveler. The great fair-haired, rangy lad had grown into a tall, energetic man whose countenance told of hardship and adventure. There were lines, such as sailors have, about his eyes. His nose was thinner and more than ever eagle-like, and the grey eyes had a look in them the world but rarely sees. He went to Philadelphia and walked up dusty stairs into counting houses and shipping offices. "Send a vessel to the northwest coast," he said to those who would listen. "I have been to it with Captain Cook. It is a glorious new land, and you may buy furs there for a song and sell them in China at a great profit." Receiving some financial support, he went in search of a suitable ship, but all in vain. As he searched, the season became too far advanced to think of beginning the northwest voyage. The backers withdrew from the venture, and John found himself in New London once again. His exasperation was natural enough, yet in justice to the American ship owner of the time, the economic disorder and poverty of the country should be noted, as well as the fact the owners were being asked to send a long and costly expedition round the Horn on the word of a solitary enthusiast. Would European merchants listen? The winter of 1784 found John at the great French port of Lorient, living on a subsidy granted him by merchants interested in his scheme. But once again, hope rose and perished like the seed upon thin ground. From Lorient he went to Paris. He was practically penniless, yet he managed to subsist in a modest manner. He lived in a room in the village of Saint-Germain and would walk to Paris, a distance of some 12 miles. While in Paris, his dream of a trading voyage collapsed for the last time. Captain John Paul Jones listened to him and fell in eagerly with his plans, but the necessary money could not be raised, and so ended the tale. Poor as he is, Ledyard is still a man of reputation and walks boldly with the great. He goes to breakfast at the house of the first American minister to France and sees at the head of the table a tall, angular man, neatly and soberly dressed in black. A tall man with a bony but strong frame, angular features, light hazel eyes and sandy reddish hair, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. John finds a sympathetic hearer in his host, for the great Virginian has a civilized man's interest in scientific exploration and a patriotic American's interest in American discovery. They stroll after breakfast, the statesman and the vagabond, and presently the minister suggests to his companion a voyage that fires his guest's imagination, even as the name of Captain Cook had kindled it just 10 years before. "I suggested to him," runs the Virginian's letter, "the enterprise of exploring the western part of our continent by passing through St. Petersburg to Kamchatka and procuring a passage thence in some of the Russian vessels to Nootka Sound, whence he might make his way across the continent, and I undertook to have the permission of the Empress of Russia solicited." John listened and, listening, became once more the vagabond who ran away to see the world. Then and there, the man flings off the disappointed trader. He eagerly embraced the proposition, wrote Jefferson. Now came a false start from London, his last delay.
I'm still the slave of fortune and the son of care. I think my last letter informed you that I was absolutely embarked on a ship in the Thames, bound to the northwest coast of America. This will inform you that I have disembarked from the said ship on account of her having been unfortunately seized by the custom house at her, and that I am obliged in consequence to alter my route, and, in short, everything. All my little baggage, shield, buckler, lancy, dogs, squire, and all gone. I only am left to what? I will only add that I am going in a few days to make a tour of the globe from London east on foot. Farewell. Fortitude. Adieu.
It is the month of December 1786, and from London, lost in smoky winter mist, the tall Yankee vagabond passes unperceived to dull Hamburg on the muddy Elbe, and thence to Copenhagen and Stockholm. The Swedes stare at a thin stranger with outlandish marks on his hands, who asks the way to St. Petersburg. The winter route to Russia, they tell him, lies across the frozen Gulf of Bothnia. The sledges strike off from Stockholm and speed east over the ice to Abo, only 50 miles on the opposite shore. But this year the Gulf is not solidly frozen. The ice is broken in mid-channel, the horses cannot pass. The traveller will have to wait till the spring frees the Gulf of ice. The words fall on the ear of a wanderer who will not wait. John Ledyard knows that he must reach St. Petersburg early in the spring if he is to cross the Siberian wastes in the summer of this same year. A small delay means a year's delay. Rather than wait or return, he will walk the 1,500 miles round the frozen sea. It is the very heart of winter, and the vagabond's path will lead him north through Sweden into Arctic Lapland, and south and east through the vast forests of Finland, now trackless in the depth of the snows. John Ledyard has no maps, no money, and no knowledge of the languages along his road. Late in the month of January 1787, a tall man wrapped in an English greatcoat trudges north from Stockholm into the grim wilderness of snow. To his right lies the great snow-covered plain of the frozen Gulf, sweeping as far as eye can see to the level rim of the world. To the left is a broken country of hills and valleys, covered with thick forests of birch and pine and fir, and channeled with frozen rivers running from the mountains to the frozen Gulf. The winter wind howls north along the ice, gathering together great dunes of snow. There is cracking and booming of the ice. John Ledyard trudges on under the short-lived and sullen day of these high latitudes. The low sun casts his long shadow behind him on his broken footprints in the snow. In the clear green twilight, guided perhaps by the distant barking of a dog, he wanders from the way to some peasant's snow-topped hut and sups on bread, milk, and salt herring with kind hosts gathered at the fire. He reaches Lapland, turns south and east through the lakes and woods of Finland, and presently the giant sentries at St. Petersburg see John Ledyard trudging into town. He reaches St. Petersburg before the 20th of March. This unparalleled journey had taken him 7 weeks, and he had managed to cover during each week a distance of some 200 miles. He left no record of how he accomplished the journey, save to write in a letter these words, "Upon the whole, mankind have used me well." "I had a letter from Ledyard lately dated at St. Petersburg," said Jefferson. He had but 2 shirts, and still more shirts than shillings. Still, he was determined to obtain the palm of being the first person to circle the earth on foot. He says that having no money, they kick him from place to place, and thus he expects to be kicked about the globe. The rest of the story is soon told. He obtained some kind of a passport from the Russian authorities and began his journey to Siberia in the train of one Dr. William Brown, a Scotch physician in the employment of the Empress Catherine. With Brown, he went 3,000 miles to Irkutsk.
Going with the courier and driving with wild Tartar horses at a most rapid rate, over a wild and ragged country, breaking and upsetting wagons, swarmed with mosquitoes, all the way hard rains, and when I arrived in Irkutsk I was, and had been for the last 48 hours, wet through and covered with one complete mass of mud.
From Irkutsk, he joined an expedition going down the Lena and alighted at Yakutsk, only some 600 miles from the Pacific coast he sought. It was the 18th of September. Imagine his dismay when the governor informed him that the winter was so close at hand that he must not expect to gain Okhotsk that year.
"Fortune, thou hast humbled me at last, for I am at this moment the slave of cowardly solicitude, lest in the heart of this dread winter there lurk the seeds of disappointment to my ardent desire of gaining the opposite continent."
Not knowing what to do, he joined a scientific expedition in charge of one Captain Billings, a fellow veteran of Cook's 3rd voyage, and returned with his former shipmate to Irkutsk. There he learned he was to be arrested on the absurd charge of being a French spy and sent back to the frontier thousands of miles behind. The details of Ledyard's arrest remain a mystery to this day, but there is little doubt that the underlying cause of it was Russian unwillingness to have a citizen of the United States prowling about. Something had happened. Perhaps the imperial authorities had suddenly heard of Ledyard's attempt to begin a rival fur trade. Whatever the answer may be, John was handed over to the custody of a sergeant and dragged back across Siberia and Russia with lunatic speed.
I had penetrated through Europe and Asia almost to the Pacific Ocean, but in the midst of my career I was arrested as a prisoner to the Empress of Russia. I was banished from the empire and conveyed to the frontiers of Poland 6,000 miles from the place where I was arrested. I know not how I passed through the kingdoms of Poland and Prussia, or thence to London, where I arrived in the beginning of May, disappointed, ragged, penniless.
He arrived in London just as the African Society is casting about for a man to explore the interior of Africa. John called on Sir Joseph Banks, who has so often been his kind and generous friend. Will Mr. Ledyard go to Africa? Yes, and when will he be ready to set out? Tomorrow morning. He reached Cairo in August and joined a caravan about to journey to Senegal. Presently he was attacked by illness. He took some fearful medicine of the time, shook his head, and closed his eyes. The fair-haired lad in the sulky, the runaway undergraduate in the great canoe, the sailor, the corporal of Marines, and the great American traveler had gone on the longest of his travels. Because the last years of John Ledyard's life found him fighting on towards a goal he almost, yet never quite, attained, there are those who see him as a mere picturesque vagabond whose life had no genuine success. What a misinterpretation! The runaway Yankee lad had set out to see the world, and he had done so. Indeed, John Ledyard had probably seen more of the vast world than any other being of his time. The vast loneliness of the sea, which comes when twilight fades and night begins. Blue cloudy islands seen at dawn, the sounds of rushing brooks in the quiet of green valleys, strange folk making strange music under the moon. All this he had hungered to see, all this he had seen. He had achieved his ambition in spite of every barrier. When Jefferson became president, he said he often thought of the man he had met in Paris, the first American to see the northwest coast, the man who had talked to him of the pine-crowded islets and the inland mountains white with snow. No doubt Jefferson fondly remembered John Ledyard, the American traveler, when he sent Lewis and Clark on their expedition to open the West.